the show the establishment warned you about.
That's right. It's the Dr. Tommy Show. We're glad you're here to join us today. We are broadcasting from the free state of Florida, as you well know. And we are broadcasting both in audio and video for your convenience. And you can access those feeds at drtommy.com/podcast. And if you're interested in other things, you can look on our YouTube site and see all the different podcasts we've had in the past, plus the ever so popular George Foreman versus Michael Moore video entitled "Once Upon a Time in America," Once Upon a Time in the Ring, which is a takeoff on the Once Upon a Time in America movie and Once Upon a Time in the West by Sergio Leone, where I put a video up with the Michael Moore fight and the George Foreman taking his crown back from Michael Moore after 20 years. And I used audio from the movie Once Upon a Time in the West with Sergio Leone. And it's got 75,000 views or thereabouts now. It's interesting. There's a dichotomy of how people view it. Some people hate the music, some people love the music. And they let that be known in the comments, which probably drives up the viewership, which is great for me. Not that I get paid for it or anything, because it's copyrighted material, but it's just kind of fun to see. I don't know if you guys have been following the news on this, but you probably have. It's interesting. After the Will Smith incident happened with Chris Rock, now we have the Dave Chapelle incident where he was attacked by a person while he was finishing up his act. And he was apparently attacked by this gentleman who perhaps took offense to his act, I assume. And as you know, Dave Chappelle's been under attack for his jokes about transgenders, and those people who have become very agitated about him have done things like protested through their job at Netflix and things like that, because that's where Dave Chappelle has a lot of his recent comedy shows are put out through Netflix and paid by Netflix. Anyway, he was attacked by this guy on stage, and the guy tackled him. And then after he was tackled, Chapelle got away from him. And then it was interesting that the guy was apparently he was seen by security, and then nobody really did anything about it. So security didn't see the guy, apprehend him before Chapelle got to him, but then afterwards, I think the security got to him maybe, but then Chappelle's people got to him as well. And Chappelle's people really did a number on him. They made him into a pretzel, a human pretzel. So he's got some orthopedic issues he's going to have to deal with if you see that on the internet. I was looking at some today on the internet. It was interesting. It was one of my favorite channels is on YouTube is Michael Franzese. He is a former capo in the Columbo crime family, one of the 5 families in New York, mafia families. And he is a capo that is now reformed and out of the life, so to speak. And he was interviewing Larry Elder, Larry Elder used to have a show on 860 right here in Tampa called the 860 WGUL. And it was on Salem Broadcasting, which is, they own a lot of stations across the country. Anyway, he no longer has his radio show. And apparently he's doing only his only type of medium now is he's doing Epic TV, which is put on by the Epic Times, which is a kind of an alternative newspaper. If you haven't read it, I have it linked on my website, drtommy.com/podcast. Anyway, they were talking about different things, and the title of it that what drew my attention was it was called The Ideal Minimum Wage is Zero. And the reason it drew my attention because this is something that's been talked about for a long time. I've seen many people talk about it, including Walter Williams and Milton Friedman. And it says that the ideal minimum wage is zero. And the reason that's interesting is because people hear that and they say, well, that means that you think the minimum wage should be zero, that people shouldn't make money, and you're a mean person because of that. And I think they get the misconception that the government somehow sets wages, which the government doesn't set wages. In the real world, the market sets wages. And so the only way that you can have a quote unquote minimum wage is if you have people who come together to determine what they want to pay for one's services. For instance, if I want to hire someone to pour a slab of concrete and they say, okay, it's going to be $3,100, but I tell them, look, I want to pay you $100, then they're never going to come to an agreement. So his minimum wage for that is whatever it is. And whenever I come to him with it and we agree to that price, then that's the wage. It doesn't have to be minimum or maximum. It is what it is. But the minimum wage came about because people were afraid that the workers were getting the short end of the stick. And so they said there needs to be a federal minimum wage. There needs to be a state minimum wage. And what these things are going to do is they're going to lift people out of poverty. And, so instead of being paid $2 an hour to shovel coal, now they're going to be paid $6 an hour to shovel coal. And then by doing that, then they're not going to be poor anymore and everybody's going to be happy. What's happened with the minimum wage really is over time, what the minimum wage has done is rise. And what it does is it inflates the cost of doing business. And if you see, and for instance, Walmart here locally, if you go in there, they have transitioned a lot of the cashiers into unemployment. And what they have in their place are self-checkout aisles, which some of us have used already because we prefer to use a self-checkout at Walmart. But they have transitioned a lot of those employees, like I said, to to wherever, not being cashiers anymore. Whether they're still working at Walmart, I don't know. They may have sent them to Busch Gardens to work, but the minimum wage was lifted or raised, and people are demanding the minimum wage be like $15. And a lot of places are paying $15 just to get someone to show up to work. A lot of the McDonald's you see around here are paying minimum wage in Tampa, in Tampa are paying $15, which is above the minimum wage, but they're just doing that so they can get people to show up to work. $30,000 a year to work at McDonald's. Anyway, the zero minimum wage is really the price that a person the lowest price that a person will possibly work for is zero. Of course, no one's going to work for zero, so then it's higher than that. But what the minimum wage does too is as Walter Williams used to say, it cuts out the lower rungs of the ladder for people to come in to be employed. So let's say you're a person who doesn't have very much, you don't have a lot of skills. You're new in the workforce. You don't have any skills. And someone says, look, I have a job for you holding this sign, but the minimum wage is, let's say it's $9 an hour. And you say, well, I'll hold the sign for $4 an hour or $4.50 an hour because right now I don't have a job. I don't have any skills. And I would like to hold your sign and kind of shake it for the traffic and then hopefully get people to come in there. And then after a while, maybe I'll find another opportunity within your business or another business and make more money. But this is going to be my way to kind of get my foot in the door. Well, what happens is when you have a $9 an hour minimum wage, maybe you don't have a person holding a sign anymore because they decide, well, it's not worth it for me to pay someone $9 an hour to stand on the road. Or you find someone who says, look, I've had experience before. I've had a job before. It wasn't holding a sign, but it was, working at McDonald's or whatever. And then that person who has the lower qualifications, who's never worked before, they're out of a job. So the minimum wage a lot of times will cut out the lower rungs of the economic ladder to people who are trying to enter the workforce. Another thing minimum wage does is it drives up the cost of labor. So a lot of contracts, particularly those union contracts, are tied to the minimum wage. So let's say that I have a contract to be a plumber or electrician or something like that, and I work in a union. Well, my minimum wage for my contract is a multiple of whatever the federal minimum wage is, or whatever the federal contractor minimum wage is. So as you see in the federal government recently, they enacted a contractor's minimum wage, and I think it was $15 an hour. So you're not allowed to work. You're not allowed to pay a contractor less than $15 an hour to work for the federal government. And so what this does too is it again makes people who are less skilled, less able to enter the workforce. And as you can tell, we already have a problem. Anywhere you go, there's a shortage of labor, people willing to work, people willing to show up to work. So that's just one of the major problems that we have. But anyway, the reason I brought that up is because that's what the title of the video was. Michael Franzese and Larry Elder was about the federal minimum wage. I'm sorry, about zero minimum wage, which is the ideal minimum wage. But there's also good stuff on there. It's an hour long. I liked it. So you can actually see a link on Michael Francese's website. on his YouTube site on drtommy.com/podcast. Got a few other things caught my attention this week. One is it's coming out. It's timely. It's called I don't know if you've called this. It's called 2000 Mules, and this is a documentary that is put on by Dinesh D'Souza, who has done similar documentaries about politics in the past. I believe he did one on Hillary Clinton before the 2016 election. I believe he did one during the Obama years, and he's done a few of them. And this latest one is called 2000 Mules, and what it is, it's a way that they were able to use technology through an organization called True the Vote to gather geospatial and temporal data. This is from American Greatness. It says, the intelligence organization True the Vote gathered geospatial and temporal data amounting to a total of 10 trillion cell phone pings between August 1st and November 6th in the battleground states of Georgia, Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Texas. Now, why does that sound familiar? Well, Georgia, Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania were the states that basically swung the election to Joe Biden, and did so in the wee hours of the morning. If you all were watching during 2020 election night, around midnight or so, it looked like Donald Trump was heading to but he was headed to a very comfortable win. Went to bed, woke up, next morning, guess what? Not so much. And more and more, Joe Biden made up ground in these key battleground states. It says, the researchers looked at data surrounding ballot drop boxes in the target areas, as well as UPS stores and select government, commercial, and non-governmental organization facilities. And what they were able to do is they were able to locate these so-called mules, who were people who were taking ballots to these ballot drop boxes. So this is the way that they were doing it. They were taking the ballots, gathering them up, and then depositing them in the drop boxes. And presumably, these ballots were not legit. And that hasn't been proven. But if you look at this documentary, and I haven't seen it yet, it premieres actually in person this week. And then there's going to be a digital premiere on May 7th. So you can watch that online for $20. But it says here, each trafficker or mule went to an average of 23 ballot drop boxes, according to the researchers. The mules collected ballots from stash houses in the targeted areas and deposited them in drop boxes, often in the wee hours of the morning from 1 to 5 a.m. So they gathered these packages, and then they took them to these different locations, and they went to different ones. So they didn't just get all of their stuff or drop all of their 10,000 votes all in one place. They went from here, and they dropped some here, and they dropped some here, and that's to avoid suspicion, obviously. It says, over the course of several weeks, the vote traffickers made multiple trips to drop boxes using gloves to conceal their fingerprints and take photos to secure payment. D'Souza notes that traffickers started wearing gloves a few days after a ballot harvesting case in Arizona secured indictments based on fingerprint evidence. This is interesting, too, because they on this AM Greatness article, if you click on it, they have a couple links here to Twitter videos. I think it's Twitter, where they're showing these people from the video. And because a lot of these places have video. A lot of places in general have video. You don't even know about it, public places. But anyway, these a lot of around these drop boxes had video, and it's just like you see when they deliver the Uber Eats to people, and then they show them. They put the food down by the door, and they knock on the door, and then they snap the picture, and then they run off. And during COVID, they would run off in the yard, outside. They would drop the food off with rubber gloves and a mask. And then they would knock, or they take a picture, and then they knock, and run to their car, because you don't want to get COVID out in the open. Anyway, so that's what happened. Is they would drop off these ballots in the drop boxes, and they'd take a picture, and then supposedly, I guess, you'd send it to whoever the runner is that's giving you the money. Now, this, like I said, this is what this Mules documentary purports. I'm not saying that's actually what happened. Because we don't know. Bill Barr said nothing happened, so we never had any investigations of any types of improprieties. So there you go. True the Vote estimates that 20,000 votes were illegally trafficked in Arizona, 14,000 in Wisconsin, 275,000 in Pennsylvania, 125,000 in Michigan, and 30,000 in Georgia, totaling 380,000 votes, which is more than enough to sway the election. Minus these illegal ballots, this is from their opinion, D'Souza's opinion. Minus these illegal ballots, Trump's electoral college votes would have been 279 to Biden's 259. All right, so let's just back up a little bit and say, okay, this is not true. Let's say it's not true. Or let's say we don't know if this is true or not. If you did not know this was true, and if you were an honest person, would you want to know, or would you want to just say this isn't true and just forget about it? Because if this happened to Joe Biden's team, let's say instead of these ballots, Mules dropping ballots for Joe Biden, they were dropping ballots for Donald Trump. Would people out there want to know? Would ABC want to know? Would the New York Times want to know? Would this FBI want to know? You're damn right they would. And so I think it deserves our attention, at least intellectually, but also it deserves the attention, I believe, from officials to say what is going on here, what happened, because this is the presidential election. And if this was, let's say you have this on Twitter right now, or say it's on YouTube right now, it probably what's going to happen on YouTube right now is because they're going to be able to use a computer to go through and see what I've said. They're going to put a little asterisk by my podcast here, and they're going to say learn the truth or learn the facts about the election, and then they'll link to Media Matters. It'll link to some type of left-wing outfit fact checker, maybe PolitiFact, and they'll say there is no evidence at all that there was any ballot trafficking or there was anything other than the greatest, most secure election ever. And like I said, it very well may have been the most secure election. That's what they said here. D'Souza says D'Souza pointed out that before the premiere of his new documentary film, that government officials and their allies in the media repeated the mantra the election was the most secure in American history. And he says the only way you could prove that were if you were to compare the amount of fraud in 2020 with 2016, 2012 with 2008, and 2024 or 2004, 2008 and 2004. And show that there is far less fraud now than any of those elections. But that was not done. That was not done because this was not something that anybody wanted to know outside of that narrow group of people, which was half the voters, and then maybe here and there a few media outlets. But otherwise, they just want to sweep this under the rug. And they may still sweep it under the rug. But I think if you watch this overnight, like I did, it was very unnerving how the numbers of votes for the gap between Trump and Biden just slowly went away. And this I think this documentary is going to go a long way to providing some explanation of how that happened. Okay, they call it the prom for the ugly or something like that. They call it the nerd prom. But politics in general is called Hollywood for the ugly. Anyway, the nerd prom is the White House Correspondents' Dinner, the self-proclaimed nerd prom. And it says, this is from the Blaze. Journalists test positive for COVID after attending White House Correspondents' Dinner. Attendees were required to prove vaccination, negative test. So the White House Correspondents' Dinner was held for the first time now in 6 years because the whole time during the Trump presidency, he said, no thanks. I'm not interested, because the White House Correspondents' Dinner is about White House people who are correspondents basically congratulating themselves and having fun with themselves. And the White House Correspondents is, I believe, when Clinton was elected, they did a poll and it's like 92% people who were in that kind of realm, the media in DC, voted for Bill Clinton. And they have no reason to believe it's changed since then. Anyway, the White House Correspondents' Dinner, after this, it said that there's a bunch of people who tested positive for COVID. So it says, comedian Trevor Noah joked that the White House Correspondents' Dinner held on April 30th was, quote, the nation's most distinguished super spreader event. Now we know that Noah's quip was more reality than a joke. Numerous journalists who attended the event, including staffers for NBC, CBS, ABC, CNN, Politico, and others, have tested positive for COVID-19 since the dinner. One of those fallen ill is ABC's Jonathan Karl, who directly interacted with President Joe Biden. And so we also know that recently Antony Blinken has tested positive. We know that Kamala Harris tested positive. And what do all these people have in common? Well, they're all vaccinated. They're all boosted. They're all everything that you're supposed to do, they've done. And these used to be called breakthrough cases. I don't know if you remember, not very recently, we were treated by none other than the President of the United States telling us that breakthrough cases were so rare. It was like unicorn rare. It was, you don't even need to think about it. A breakthrough case is just like one in a blue moon. What was the number he used was 1 in 5,000 or something like that. Clearly, breakthrough cases, which they don't use the terminology anymore because it's lost all meaning, because there's nothing to do with a breakthrough. It's cases amongst people who've been vaccinated are so common that they don't even talk about anymore. But this is interesting because, again, I'm not saying that people who got vaccinated wasted their time. I'm not saying that at all. I think that people who wanted to get the vaccine, who got it, are absolutely that's what being a healthy person's about, is doing the things that you think are right for you within reason. If you think healthy is doing lines of cocaine, then that's actually a bad idea. But if you think getting this vaccine helped you and you wanted to do it, then absolutely you should have done it. But what I'm saying about this vaccine is that, and what I've always said is, no one should have ever been forced to get this vaccine. And the reason they forced us to get it, or forced people to get it, was because they said that if you didn't, you were going to spread it. Just like every one of these people did. Every one of these people that was a White House Correspondents' Dinner who were double vaxxed, quadruple vaxxed, they spread it. And that's what we were told. The unvaxxed are the ones that are spreading this disease. They were the typhoid Marys. They were the ones that were going to be out there keeping us locked down because they just wouldn't do their part, and they were too selfish to do what they were supposed to do. And if they just got the vaccine, then we could all stop this. You heard this amongst all of the different talking heads that they're, if people would just do what they're supposed to do, and you can still see it right now. If you were on Facebook, I don't know if you are, but I bet that there are people still out there saying that the reason that the COVID's still going on is because there's unvaxxed out there. They are completely immune to this type of information, or they don't know about this information. And it's a very good chance that it's the latter, because stuff like this will never be reported in a critical way in the Washington Post and New York Times, CBS, CNN, MSNBC. Any of that will never report critically on the idea that isn't this strange that all of these people who are quadruple vaxxed, who have done everything they're supposed to do, people are very responsible, like Kamala Harris and all of these good journalists, they all are quadruple vaxxed, and they all got the disease, and they all spread it apparently because they got it, and they said that they had to have a negative test when they went there. So they either had and here's the other thing. I put more credence in a negative test than did the vaccine. Why? For the obvious reasons. If you go to the White House Correspondents' Dinner and you have a negative test that day, I think the chance of you having COVID after that is slim. However, if you are vaccinated, I presume that you don't have to have a negative test. It says that attendees were required to prove vaccination, negative test. I take that to mean it was one or the other. And my guess would be, if it was both, then that really throws a wrench into the plans of those who say the vaccine is what's important. Because if these people both had vaccines and a negative test and they still spread COVID around, then there is absolutely no reason to ever test again. And there's absolutely no reason to ever have vaccines, except for as a requirement There's no reason to have that because it does nothing. Now, if you need a test to see if someone's got COVID, so you know if to treat them for COVID or if you're going to treat them for flu or if you're going to treat them for a bacterial infection, that's a different thing. Or if you want to say the vaccine is going to help you stay out of the hospital or something like that. But to be still on the bandwagon that the vaccines are stopping COVID transmission, you have to be crazy. The Federal Reserve is going to have its fastest rate hikes in 3 decades in desperate attempt to stave off recession. This is from the Blaze. It says, with growing concerns over an inevitable recession, the Federal Reserve plans to raise interest rates at its fastest clip in 3 decades. Well, that's bad news. Why is that bad news? Well, it's bad news because raising those rates means that people who are out there trying to buy a house right now are going to end up paying a lot of money in interest. And people who have credit card debt are going to pay a lot of money in interest. And this is something that's necessary. It's necessary to fix inflation. You have to raise the interest rates to fix inflation. That's what was done in Paul Volcker in the Reagan administration, and it caused a recession. But then they finally fixed inflation because inflation was out of control under Jimmy Carter, as it is out of control under Joe Biden. Anyway, but it says here that the Fed is going to raise interest rates, and they apparently raised them by 0.5%. But then they announced, I just saw earlier today on the market news there, I believe it was on Robinhood, that the market rebounded today, or was it yesterday? Because then they said, well, we're not going to raise interest rates again so soon. So they kind of backed off what was reported is going to be multiple rate hikes to say, look, we think this 50 basis points hike, 0.5% is going to be enough to fix the recession. But as I look at it now, stock market does not look so good. And it may be soon that we're going to see the reality of what Donald Trump was warning us about. And I hope it's not true. He said that if Joe Biden gets elected, you're going to see the worst depression that you've ever seen. We'll see. But I don't know. If you're and the bad thing is, if you're in the market to buy a house, it's going to be more expensive for you to buy a house. But at the same time, if you're renting, you can't afford to rent either because the rent keeps going up. Every time you renew your lease, the rent goes up. So what are people going to do? And then so as businesses spend more money on interest, then there's going to be potentially unemployment because the businesses aren't able to spend as much money on employees as they do to service their debt. So there's going to be less jobs, fewer jobs. Also, people are spending more money on interest, so they're not able to spend as freely with other things. That automatically makes the economy slow down, and then more people are out of work. So the coming recession most likely is going to be hopefully not a depression. The recession, we're now in the second quarter. The first quarter was negative growth. It was negative 1.4%, I think. And now we are in the second quarter. You can't tell what a recession is until after the fact. But the likelihood is that this quarter will not be positive growth. It's very unlikely. If the first quarter was negative growth, then this quarter, as things are going now, as I'm looking at the Dow, it's only down 0.1% right now, but overall it's dropped a lot from the beginning of the month. Either way, it's just gonna get worse, and so you think maybe we are already in a recession, but recession by definition is one of those things you can't say until it's already happened. So it's an after the fact thing. But we are in the midst of the second quarter. There's a good chance this quarter is going to be negative growth. After this quarter is over, they're going to look back and say it was negative growth. Then you're going to say, yes, there's a recession. But the chances are you're in a recession now. This is got to do with Roe v. Wade. So biggest court case maybe in my lifetime for sure, and it wasn't even in my lifetime, but the biggest court case that's ever been talked about is Roe v. Wade, the lawsuit that said in its ruling that there is a constitutional right to abortion. And so apparently there was a leak of a circulating opinion written supposedly by Samuel Alito that's saying that there was 5 justices on the court, presumably because it was a majority opinion circulating that Roe v. Wade was going to be basically overturned, and which would then make it to where abortion was decided by states. People have this misconception that overturning Roe v. Wade means that there'll never ever be another abortion, which is not right, which is not true. It's the states will decide it. So that's the big concern, is that the states are going to be able to decide abortion laws, and it won't not be protected by this Supreme Court ruling Roe v. Wade. Well, anyway, it was leaked, and it was leaked by presumably a liberal justice's clerk. That's the idea, is that there was only, I think it was 36 people who could have got this document, who could have obtained this document and then leaked it. And the thought is it was done by one of the liberal Supreme Court justices, clerks, in order to just basically blow the cover of it and make it politically untenable for those in the majority to continue on. So the majority, it appears, for this ruling would have been Samuel Alito, who they think wrote it because of his style of writing, Clarence Thomas, Kavanaugh, Coney Barrett, and Gorsuch. And then the swinger, John Roberts, swung, as he is apt to do, to the left, to the liberal side, to write with Breyer, Kagan, and Sotomayor. So the 4 liberals, John Roberts, Breyer, Kagan, and Sotomayor dissented, apparently. Okay? So anyway, so this is what's going on. But there's a funny thing that happened, is that Joy Behar on The View has said that in order to basically swing this back to their favor, she is recommending a sex strike over Roe v. Wade. So it says, The View, this is from The Blaze, The View host Joy Behar called on women to go on a sex strike to protest a possible overturning of Roe v. Wade by the Supreme Court. The proposed act of defiance in support of abortion was widely panned on social media based on ruthless Twitter reactions. So this is a 79-year-old Joy Behar. She says, "We have more power than you think we do, and some of it could be in the bedroom. Just saying." Now, that's a disgusting thing to think about in my mind. But anyway, that's just something that you should be on the lookout for. If your significant other starts acting a little cold, and and if you find out that she's been watching The View, or she watches The View, or he watches The View, whoever it is, your partner watches The View, and then they start acting cold to you, it may be that Joy Behar got to him. And I don't know how you fix that. And I really don't. Back to, this is more stuff about that. It says, Democrats quietly scrub abortion bill language saying men can get pregnant. So there was this effort to say, okay, they're going to strike down Roe v. Wade. We're going to pass a law now that says what basically Roe v. Wade said in a court ruling. We're going to pass it as a matter of fact, as a law, a federal law, which is what they should do if they really want to do it. So oftentimes the left relies on the government to impose rulings or things that they think should be done through the courts and or through the administrative bureaucracy, i.e. the executive branch, the non-elected executive branch. So a lot of times they'll try to, they'll say, look, we want to do say abortion. Abortion is we want this to happen, and then the courts now are saying, well, it can't have it. So the right way to do it would be to pass a law. You're the people's elected representatives, and if the people you're representing want this, then you should pass a law. But a lot of times that's too hard because you have to get consensus, you have to get more than one person, or you have to get a group of people to agree. And so it's easier to say, the Secretary of Health shall determine, or the Secretary of Health shall write rules about this. Or you have a judge out there who says maybe this isn't the way it should be and it should be this way, then suddenly that becomes the law. Anyway, it says here, the latest version of the Women's Health Protection Act, which would effectively make abortion a statutory right, scrubbed references to transgender and non-binary people's pregnancies, as well as the language related to, quote, reproductive justice. So apparently they had this bill out there, and they said that in the early drafts of it, it said... the newest version removed references to white supremacy and gender oppression, apparently because that kind of muddies the water. So if you're... it's like this thing. You're trying to make an argument. You make the argument succinct. You try to make it succinct, complete, and don't get lost in the weeds. And you start throwing in there things about white supremacy and gender oppression, and just kind of dilutes your argument. Anyway, it says clarifying that its provisions applied to anyone with the, quote, capacity for pregnancy, including, quote, transgender men, non-binary individuals, those who identify with a different gender, and others. So they were trying to say, look, pregnancy, it's not enough to say it's a Women's Health Protection Act. We got to, I guess, the transgender men, non-binary individuals, those who identify as a different gender, and others, and Women's Health Protection Act was too long. So they just called it the Women's Health Protective Act, but then threw in this caveat about people. And this is getting back. I think we're going to look back on these times as one of the stupider times in our life, in the life of our country and society and culture in general, is when we're getting into these things that are, where we're arguing about transgender men being pregnant, and it just, there's some people out there who are transgender who don't like the way that they are. Okay. They don't like being a female, or they don't like being a male, and then they come to this deliberative process, and it makes them uneasy. So then they decide they're going to change. Okay, so Bruce Jenner wants to become Caitlyn Jenner, and then she does. He does. She does. He does. Anyway, that's one thing. But then you say, well, okay, we're going to say to this person, look, that's great. Your life you're happier now. Everyone's happier. You've hurt no one. And congratulations. God be with you. Okay. But then it's not enough. So then you have to have these people come in who are writing these Women's Health Protection Act and start saying, all right, let's write a bill on abortion. All right. And they start writing a bill on abortion, and they're calling it a Women's Health Protection Act. Okay. We're going to write it to protect these women from these terrible people who want to say that the state should decide when abortion is legal or not. These terrible people who decide that, want to think that the state should have anything to say with it. But then they say, wait, it's not enough. We have to throw in there the non-binary individuals. Okay. We'll say women's health, women and non-binary individuals health protection. No. We got to call it transgender, non-binary. And then before you know it, you're down this path. It's just so idiotic to me that we're living in these times. We're living in these times where plexiglass is thought to prevent viral transmission. We're living in these times when we have to have transgender man emojis holding their bellies just to be inclusive. And, it goes back to the first thing we were talking about with Chapelle getting attacked. So Chapelle getting attacked is nothing more than the outgrowth of this type of behavior. This belief that we have to have all of these people who believe this, and if you don't believe it, then you're not inclusive. And so you have this thing where you'll have Dave Chapelle being attacked on stage, and this is an outgrowth of the same type of mentality where people are saying, we don't like to hear what you have to say on our college campus, and because of that, we're not going to allow you to speak, and we're going to hold demonstrations and things just because what you say, what you're talking about, we don't agree with, and it makes us upset. And so we're going to protest your speech if you're Ben Shapiro or Ann Coulter or I can't remember who. Oh, Mike Pence. Mike Pence is like the most unaggressive conservative person there is. And he tried to speak at it was a Turning Point. No, it wasn't Turning Point. It was a Young Americans for Freedom event, and they tried to cancel him out. Anyway, so these individuals that grow up on these college campuses, they go to these schools where the faculty there teach them and indoctrinate them and say, what you believe is the most important. You shouldn't allow other people's beliefs to threaten yours. And if they do threaten yours, you should demand that they not be allowed to talk, and you should silence them. And I'll march with you, and we'll put on our hats, our pink hats, and we'll go and march and make sure that the Mike Pence can't speak. And we'll make sure that your ears are not polluted by their different opinions, which is harmful to you. And your mind must remain this mush thing that I mold and I manipulate and CNN manipulates. And your mind cannot be allowed to expand past those boundaries. And so you have these kids that go on college campuses like this, and they're told, freedom of speech, your freedom of speech is endangered by someone else talking. I've actually heard them say that. They said that so somebody come to speak on campus, and they said, you can't speak here because I have freedom of speech, which they take to mean that because your speech doesn't agree with their speech, then you don't have any ability to speak, because in their mind, freedom of speech means their right not to be offended, which it does not say in the Constitution. And even it didn't say in the Constitution, or did, it's not natural. Natural law is that you have the freedom to express yourself. There's no natural law that says you have the freedom to always have people around you who agree with you, and you have the freedom not to be offended ever. That's not natural. What's natural is you should be allowed to be unmolested. You should be allowed to organize yourself with people that you believe the same things as you believe, or allow yourself to be exposed to those who don't believe the same. You have the freedom of association, and you should be allowed to speak without risk of punishment or for government intrusion. But what they do is these people, they go on these college campuses, and they get their minds just twisted and torn and manipulated. And then before you know it, they come out thinking that, they go work for Amazon or Netflix, and they say, or Disney, and they say, if you don't believe exactly as I believe, I'm going to demonstrate, and I'm going to quit my job, and I'm going to get on social media, and I'm going to blow up Twitter. And then you're going to have to come on your knees, and you're going to have to come and beg for me for forgiveness. And then if you have the audacity to go and make a joke that I don't agree with, I'm going to rush you on stage. And if you're like the guy who rushed Dave Chapelle on stage, then you're going to rush him on stage, and then promptly need to see an orthopedist to do whatever needs to be done to put your arm back into the way it was before you got there. I had some more stuff here on Pfizer, Daniel Horowitz, but it's a little long, and I think it would be too long to talk about. But anyway, it's on conservativereview.com. It's Daniel Horowitz. What did Pfizer know and when? 3 important findings. It talks about how Pfizer needed to hire a bunch of new staff just to deal with the adverse events complaints, and also it talked about Pfizer immunity, what Pfizer knew about natural immunity, and then also the rates of myocarditis. And this is part of the ongoing release of information that was ordered by this judge because of FOIA requests from public health and medical professionals for transparency. And also from the Informed Consent Action Network. They requested these documents. These are the documents that Pfizer wanted to keep hushed up for 75 years, if you could believe that. And this federal judge says you can't. But anyway, there's some interesting stuff coming up. If you're interested in reading more about that, go to conservativereview.com and check out Daniel Horowitz. And it's pretty eye-opening, especially for those of you who are skeptics about how government works with big companies. That's it for today. If you're interested in learning more about Dr. Tommy Show, go to drtommy.com/podcast. And if you are interested in learning more about our practice, come in to see us, and we'll give you a in-person consultation. We'll talk about your healthcare needs and whether or not we're the right fit for you. And if you're looking for a doctor who will be able to address you one-on-one without the the bureaucracy, without all of the middlemen that so is common in today, and without all the wasted time on the phone and frustration and all that nonsense, come and see us. Okay? And until next time, we'll see you later. Bye-bye.